Hey everyone, I'm here in Oklahoma City and we're going to take a look at a historical figure that's important for American history, world history, aviation history, all of that. And it's right here in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. This is Memorial Park Cemetery and it is on the edge of Oklahoma City and Edmond. And it's a massive cemetery, as you can see. But this aviation pioneer is Wiley Post. As you come in the cemetery and you head to section 48, you'll see where this memorial is. And this was erected here, just telling the life story of Wiley Post. It's kind of summarized here. You'll notice at the top of this, it says Wiley Post, the father of modern aviation. And this is a depiction of him right here with an eye patch. And this is him in a pressurized suit, and this is the airplane that he really got famous in. So Wiley Post was born in Texas in 1898. And not long after he was born, his family moved to Oklahoma, just outside of Maysville. They were a sharecropper family. And he was really into working on farm equipment and stuff like that. So in the 6th grade, he actually dropped out of school because he kind of felt like it was wasting his time, and he didn't want to be there. He just wanted to be working on farm equipment. But from there, he went to a air show that was in Lawton, Oklahoma, and that's where he first got introduced into airplanes. And he wanted to start flying from then on. But his life had kind of a different course here. He then got involved into stealing automobiles, and he would do that by throwing tires out on the road. And so he got convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison for stealing automobiles. After 13 months of being in prison, there were 2 doctors that diagnosed him with melancholy, and they released him on parole because of that. So from there, he started barnstorming, and he was a parachute jumper, like it says here. And once he started doing that, he picked up a few hours of flying, and that's where he learned how to fly. He decided that he was going to purchase his own plane, and these are things that are not really said on this monument here, but he purchased his own plane, but he got the idea of purchasing his own plane from working in the oil field. He decided to do that. But the tragic thing about that is the first day he was on his job, some metal flew off of a co-worker's sledgehammer and struck him in the left eye, which caused him to be blind. So from that worker's compensation and settlement, he was able to purchase his first plane, which was a wrecked plane, and then he paid for it to be repaired, and that's how he got into aviation. From there, he was able to eventually land a job with F.C. Hall, who was a oil man, and he got hired as a commercial pilot. And he was then involved with the purchase of this plane. It was a Lockheed plane, Lockheed Vega, and it was a commercial aircraft where he flew people back and forth all over the nation. And he worked for F.C. Hall doing that, and that's where he met Will Rogers, and another fellow Oklahoman that is famous. But in his time off, when he wasn't flying commercially for F.C. Hall, he was able to use that plane for his own leisure. And he eventually convinced F.C. Hall to finance a flight around the world. Now, this is a time period where no one had ever done this in an airplane. We had Lindenberg that flew across the Atlantic, but no one had flown around the world in an airplane. And so this was financed by F.C. Hall, and he went with his navigator, which is this Harold Gaddy that you see here, and they flew around the world in 8 days and 16 hours. They left off the 16 hours there. But when he arrived in New York City, they gave him a huge ticker tape parade, just tons of paper flying everywhere, a big reception. None of them, I don't think any of them expected it. But the thing about that is Wiley was just kind of left after that event and said, you know, is that it? I mean, is that all there is to accomplish? And he just suffered from depression all his life, but he wanted to do something more. So then that leads you to 1933 right here. And Post then decided to take this Winnie Mae airplane right there and fly it around the world one more time. But this time, he wanted to do it alone. And so he got several backers here in the Oklahoma City and Yukon area, and they financed him to fly around the world. I think it was $40,000 that they backed him on, and he took off and flew over to Berlin, Germany. And of course, when he landed in Berlin, Germany in 1933, it was a lot different world than whenever he was over there in 1931. At that time, Hitler had come into power and swastikas started popping up in the country. But he did fly all the way around the world by himself. It was actually in a faster time than when he flew before. And the astonishing thing is he was by himself. And so he was able to beat his previous record of flying around the world by himself. And that's the remarkable thing. He did have some issues as far as his autopilot not working and things like that, and he was by himself. So one of the interesting things about him flying around the world is, how did he keep awake? You know, there's no one else to say, hey, you're dozing off or whatever, and his autopilot wasn't working exactly right. So one of the things that's interesting is he actually tied a wrench to his finger, and when his hand dropped because he fell asleep at the at the controls, the weight of the wrench would jerk him back awake. And so that's kind of how he stayed awake. But when he arrived in Bennett Field, New York, he was greeted by 50,000 people there. And this time in New York City, they put on another ticker tape parade, and it was even larger than before. The next day, he was actually able to meet President Roosevelt. And you know, this, you have to remember, the 1930s are an era of the Great Depression. And so people were needing a hero, and Wiley Post was that hero for people in the Great Depression. I mean, he was able to do something that people thought wasn't possible, or that no one would ever be able to do. So in the time of the Depression, it gave them a little sense of hope. And anyways, from there, he still had that same feeling. What am I going to do? So he then had, he was a visionary and a dreamer of his time. And it's a good thing that he was, because he started having an idea that he was going to fly up higher than anybody else. And of course, doing that in the Winnie Mae, it was a plywood plane. And he could not do that in that plywood plane because of the pressure, and the body wouldn't be able to withstand that. So what he did was, with the help of B.F. Goodrich, he developed this pressurized flight suit. Now, this pressurized flight suit is the basis for all astronaut suits. But it was basically patterned after a dive suit, and it was modified. And he came up with this high pressurized suit, and he went above into the stratosphere, and he is credited with discovering the jet stream. And he first did that here in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and then he was able to fly across the country at record speeds and record heights. And so the interesting thing about him is he was a pioneer in aviation, and that is why they call him the father of modern aviation. And so one of the things that he developed was that high pressured flight suit, the jet stream, which most airliners travel across whenever they're flying because it's more fuel efficient. They're able to go faster and longer and stuff like that. And he was able to do that for the first time. So he was really kind of like the first ever astronaut in a way. And when you look in space books and stuff like that, they're going to show you that suit right there, in which, you know, it's kind of weird looking, but he kind of looks like some kind of spaceman from Mars or something like that. But when he was done with all of that, he decided that he was going to make a new mail route going across Alaska. And he was going to do that. At that time, the Winnie Mae was retired, and he purchased 2 planes, which he pieced together and made a plane all of its own. And he took off and went up to this Alaska territory with his good friend Will Rogers. And they spent some time up there hunting and fishing, but the goal was to get a new route going over to Russia and Siberia, stuff like that, a new mail route. The unfortunate thing is in Point Barrow, Alaska, is that shortly after takeoff, the engine died and he crashed, and it killed both Will Rogers and Wiley Post. And just a tragic event that happened on August 15th, 1935, as you can see there. And from there, you had Charles Lindbergh, who wanted to be responsible for bringing the men back home. So there was a pilot that he got to fly these gentlemen back home. And so they took off with both men in the plane, and then they dropped off Will Rogers in California, and then it flew on to Oklahoma City. And at Oklahoma City, there were about 8,000 people awaiting his arrival. And as you can see here, this was the largest funeral in state history. I'm not for sure on the numbers when you read some of it. Because there was several spots where they had him and they were remembering him. They first took him to Maysville, Oklahoma, where he grew up, and so they had him lying in state there. Then they brought him to the state capitol and had him lying in state there. So a lot of people were waiting in line just to catch a glimpse of him standing behind some ropes. And but I've heard reports of that it was around 40,000 people, but it escalates because they had a couple funerals, and this funeral at this church I've heard was about 20,000 people. So it depends on where they had those memorial services. I believe that there was several of them. But anyways, he was buried here in this cemetery, Memorial Park Cemetery. And from this memorial right here, you can see this walkway right here, and his grave is right there. We're going to go over and see that. You can see some flowers here that were left and a couple American flags. And then you'll just see this name here, Post. And then just kind of cut at an angle right here. And right here is where he's at. This is the grave of Wiley Post right here, and there's nothing fancy about this. And you can just see flying cross right there. But I think that's why they decided to put a memorial in there. Definitely an important man in Oklahoma history and American history. One of the things about when he passed away with Will Rogers is it was a tragic loss for Oklahoma and for America. But as far as fame, Wiley Post was known more around the world, so it was actually bigger news that Wiley Post passed than it was for Will Rogers, because Will Rogers was known here in America as a humorist and an actor and a newspaper journalist. But as far as around the world, there were a lot of people in a lot of different countries and a lot of people that were into aviation around the world, and they knew who Wiley Post was. So that was a huge news story whenever he passed away. But he is buried here next to his wife, May Post, who died much later. You can't be confused with the airplane which was named Winnie Mae. That's no relation to this name right here. As you'll recall, Winnie Mae was named after F.C. Hall's daughter. And so that's how the airplane got its name, was after F.C. Hall's daughter. But this is May Post, Wiley Post's wife, and she never remarried. And there are no children. Of course, there are some relatives of Wiley. It was a fairly large family, and so there are some posts in Oklahoma, probably down in the Maysville area. But it's interesting, you know, he's an aviation pioneer, especially for modern aviation, and it's interesting to see some of the things that are named in his honor around and about in the Oklahoma City area. And I'm going to show you those. So I'm now just south of downtown Oklahoma City, and if you're on Robinson, you'll notice this park here is named in Wiley Post's honor. So inside the Wiley Post Park is this Wiley Post statue here, and it is a rather large statue. You can see the base here where his foot is. Compare it to my hand, it's pretty tall. But on it you'll see Wiley Post depicted there in front of the Winnie Mae airplane, and you can see his year of birth and the year of his death, and it just says Barnstormer, Test Pilot, Speed Flyer, Globe Conqueror, and then founder of the pressurized flight suit. But it just kind of tells a little bit of his accomplishments around this statue. And over on this side you can see a map there with a compass and a globe, which is kind of fitting since he conquered that globe. It's kind of disappointing in a way. This statue used to be in the Bicentennial Park in downtown Oklahoma City, and it's moved a little bit south here, and this compass is broken right here, and I don't know if that happened during the move or if it's something that happened here. Even part of this globe is busted, and then you can see how it's broken right there and cracked over on that side. This side right here shows his flight around the globe and the route that he took, and the different countries he landed in. And then it just tells a little bit about his accomplishments in those two flights around the globe. The first one is his flight with the navigator, and then the second one is his solo flight. And you'll notice here, this is the artist that did this sculpture in 1962. This side of this monument is his accomplishments going up into the stratosphere. The swirly one right in the center is above Bartlesville, Oklahoma, where he was able to reach the altitude of 48,000 feet. And that's kind of the unofficial record. He was doing something that had never been done before. And you can see him depicted there in his pressurized spacesuit that he developed. And he then was able to go up into the jet stream and fly across the country at speeds of up to 348 miles an hour, which was unheard of. He was doing something that no one else had done before. And he was a pioneer because of that. Now there's a lot of jetliners that fly up in that area, and it's more fuel efficient, and they can fly further and faster because of that. On this side of the statue and monument, you can see Will Rogers and Wiley Post depicted there. This is actually an outline of Alaska there. You can see Point Barrow right at the top. And then it just talks about how on August 15th, 1935, that we lost both of them, and their lives were cut short. And like I said, these little things here just tell a little bit about the history. Like this one's telling about, with the help of the Goodrich Company, he was able to develop that spacesuit. And then a little bit about the Winnie Mae. Pretty neat statue here. I think he's one of the figures in Oklahoma history that's major, and he's kind of been lost over time. Definitely worth a visit here at this little park, and it's right next to a playground, so you can hear kids playing and stuff. But I don't know, kind of like him in a more visible area in the downtown area, but I guess I understand why they've put him in a park that's named in his honor. Either way, pretty cool to see. This is Wiley Post Elementary in Oklahoma City, and it is an elementary school that is named in Wiley Post's honor. If you look on this sign right here, it looks like their mascot is probably the Jets or something. We are now at the Wiley Post Airport, and this is in Oklahoma City near the Bethany War Acres area, and this airport was named in his honor, and it's probably the second largest airport in Oklahoma City. The major airport that's here in Oklahoma City is the Will Rogers Airport. So both of these men have the distinct honor of having airports named after them, and it's to memorialize them and their importance to our state and to Oklahoma City. So thank you for joining me today as we peered into the life of Wiley Post, his memorial and his grave site, as well as a couple things in the city that are named in his honor. If you enjoy these kind of things, I do have a Instagram and YouTube account, Rhetty for Fun. I'll go around and document different historical figures or famous figures, people, places, or museums, roadside oddities or attractions, things of that nature. And so yeah, I appreciate you guys watching. You got any ideas of something that I need to go see or check out? Just leave a comment below and let me know.